Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry are among the biggest risers in January ADP. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, it's a great show. We've got some ADP movement from Dynasty League football here in the month of January. A lot of big winners. And Kate, let's start at the running back position. Jonathan Taylor, running back for the Colts, actually saw the biggest change in value when it came to ADP. Right now, he is up to, you want to guess where he's up at running backs?
He's got to be top 5, right?
Yeah, RB5. RB5, he is up to 20th overall, or excuse me, 21st overall in startup drafts. Why the sudden rise for a 26-year-old running back on a not very good offense?
I mean, we know it's due to that red hot closeout to the season. Now, I do think it's interesting because we have a couple of older running backs that saw a big bump in ADP this month, but Jonathan Taylor, it obviously comes from his disgustingly good end to the season. Over the last 4 games, totaled 627 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. 17-game pace for that. 2,665 rushing yards, 26 rushing touchdowns. Now, wasn't super involved as a receiver, but with rushing numbers like that, you don't need to be. What's interesting is he was super efficient, averaged just under 30 carries per game in that 4-game stretch. The only question is how much can you buy into a running back who we know running backs can be, a little bit more prone to taking value hits when the offense is not as good. How much do you trust buying into this Colts offense and Jonathan Taylor specifically, knowing that they have a big question mark at quarterback?
This one's really tricky for me because I do think Jonathan Taylor is an outstanding talent. And anytime that he's fully healthy, he's basically averaging 100 yards per game. We saw that in 2021 when he led the NFL in rushing yards. And then we saw it again this year. It's just the injuries. 2022, he missed 6 games. 2023, he missed 7 games. This year, he stayed healthier, missed 3 games, but still ran for over 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns. So it's just, can you trust a running back that's going to be 20 or that just turned 26 to continue to stay healthy? I don't know. But I also understand, Kate, you look at the running backs behind him, and they all have question marks. Saquon Barkley is older. Now, I actually would switch those two. I would rather have Barkley, but Kyren Williams is going into the final year of his contract. He's got fumbling concerns. Josh Jacobs is older. Derrick Henry is older. James Cook is going into the final year of his contract. So I think it's just a process of elimination when it comes to the running back position. I like Derrick Henry, I like Jonathan Taylor, but that does feel a little rich for me.
It feels rich, but I think, maybe comparatively, when you're looking at running back rankings, it does feel right. He's got 2 years left on his contract. Again, we know he's 26 years old, but we're also coming off a season where age has not mattered. And I think this was kind of a big anomaly that's shaken up our perception of older running backs in a huge way, because we saw all these running backs have kind of these big time renaissances, despite the fact that, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, they all rank among, the top running backs in terms of touch totals, but we're still seeing him get it done when they're in more favorable situations. I think the biggest question for me is just how favorable is the situation for the Colts. Now, we've on this podcast been historically critical of Anthony Richardson, his abilities as a passer. I think we saw him make some strides toward the end of the season, but he still isn't a good passer.
No,
Like
no.
maybe a little bit better than the stats would indicate, but still, you didn't see him take the step forward that you would want to see him take heading into year 3. So those are the biggest looming question marks. It's not about Jonathan Taylor and his values or his talent specifically. It's situationally.
And again, I really like Jonathan Taylor, but you look at some of the other players that are going in that same range, like Jackson Smith-Njigba, T. Higgins, Ramadunze, Zay Flowers. Like I just would rather have all of those guys. And if you're in a single quarterback league, you can draft somebody like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels right at that spot as well. It's really tough for me to buy into that spot, but I also understand there just aren't very many running backs out there that you feel great about. And I think Jonathan Taylor is one, even at the age of 26, that you do feel good about. I want to ask you about the other running back riser that we have listed here, Derrick Henry, who actually has the 4th greatest change in value over the last month. He is up from 69th overall up to 46 overall. He is now RB, I'm looking at it right now, RB 11 at 31 years old. Are you vibing with that?
I think I mean, it makes sense. It's not like we've seen him slow down. We've heard endless things about the meticulous way that Derrick Henry takes care of his body, which is what he credits as, the reasoning for him to defy pretty much any sort of aging factors whatsoever. Now, I will say we did see him kind of cool down a bit down the stretch. Through weeks 9, we saw him have 4 top 5 finishes at the running back position. He went through a bit of a drive spell. RB 15, RB 20, RB 13, RB 18, RB 37. Like, luckily, he came through for us in the most important week where it mattered, capping off week 17 with another top 5 finish. But I think we saw it with the Ravens this year. It was really nice to have Derrick Henry, but obviously you have the proficiency of Lamar Jackson as a passer as well. You have his skill set as a runner. I do think that there were times where I was just kind of surprised to see Derrick Henry on the sideline.
I don't know what to think about this, Kate. I really don't. You know how much I love Derrick Henry. And I do think this Baltimore offense is going to be very favorable to any running back. We saw this play out over the last couple of years, whether it was Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins, or even you go back to Lamar's rookie year when it was Mark Ingram scoring 22 touchdowns or whatever number it was. Like, the running backs in this offense are going to eat. It's just at what point will Derrick Henry start to slow down? I don't think we saw it this year, but that doesn't mean it can't happen next year. So
We've been saying it for 8 years.
I know. So to me, I'm looking at Derrick Henry as a 1-year rental every year moving forward. And you've got to assume next year's probably going to be the last year of him being that guy. Again, can you imagine him doing this at age 32, 33, 34? Probably not. So if you needed RB1, a low end RB1, you could draft Derrick Henry in that 45 to 48 range. But again, I'm looking at some of the other names there, and it's like James Cook, Kenneth Walker. If you want to grab some receivers, you can get a Michael Pittman. I think I am more apt to buy Jonathan Taylor at RB5 and picking him at the bottom of round 2 than I am to spending a 4th round pick on Derrick Henry, just because there is a 5-year age gap here.
I mean, yeah, and that is significant. Now, do I think we're going to see Jonathan Taylor play into his 30s like we see Derrick Henry? Absolutely not. Obviously, you mentioned the health concerns and such. Derrick Henry has proven time and time again that he has been one of the most durable running backs. And again, I think just a huge testament to the way that he takes care of his body. And that's totally, it's understandable when you see the difference in the tank that Derrick Henry is and the reliability we've seen over the course of his career. I keep catching myself because every year I feel like we have this conversation. Well, it's got to be the last for Derrick Henry. It's got to be the last for Derrick Henry.
His situation is so favorable, but even if he slows down a little bit, I still think he can return value.
I mean, yeah, and I think like as long as he's with the Ravens now, he's got 1 year left on that deal. The contract he signed with the Ravens was a 2-year deal. Now, would you be surprised at all if the Ravens manage to win a Super Bowl next season and Derrick Henry's like,
No, I wouldn't.
I'm out. I'm going out on top. Like I could easily picture that being within the realm of possibility.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. So then,
Yeah.
are you okay burning a 4th or 5th round dynasty startup pick on a running back who might only be around for 1 and let's say even 2 years at the most? I don't know. It's rich.
It's rich, and I think the tiebreaker to consider here is like what other players could I be drafting
Yes.
in that range? And I mean, I think that is enough to tell you everything you need to know.
That's what we always say. Sequencing matters so much in these startup drafts, and
yes,
we don't advocate for taking a running back like in round 1 of your startup drafts, but sometimes drafting 1 in round 2 or 3 is much better than drafting 1 in rounds 4, 5, 6 because there's just no value to doing that right now.
yeah, and I mean, again, kind of looking at the players around Derrick Henry in that situation, James Cook being drafted just ahead of Derrick Henry.
Yep.
Terry McLaurin a couple spots ahead, DJ Moore, like all of these players. And generally speaking, I'm going to lean toward the wide receiver in these situations because I just, there's more longevity there. But it's rich when you consider the other names that you could potentially be buying into.
Speaking of wide receivers, let's talk about a few receivers that saw massive improvements in their ADP in the month of January. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage stress, improve your sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into your busy schedule can be a challenge. But that is where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. It's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by so many insurance plans. And for most insured members, there is a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. I know for someone like me, I live in a place where it's really cold. You get cabin fever. Sometimes you just need to talk to somebody to tell them how you're feeling. Talkspace can help you with that. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That is Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing some of the biggest winners when it comes to the newest batch of ADP that we got from Dynasty League Football. And Kate, the number one riser at the wide receiver position is none other than Jalen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He went from 127 overall to 61st overall. Right now, among wide receivers, he is being drafted as, let's see, where am I missing? Yep, wide receiver 35. Wide receiver 34. How do we feel about that rise for McMillan?
I mean, it's absolutely it's meteoric. But I mean, 3rd round draft capital tied to a good quarterback who we saw provide this offense a lot of stability. Now, to be clear, it's not like we saw a ton of yardage from Jalen McMillan in his rookie season. 461 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. There was a lot of fantasy value that came on the back of touchdowns. And I'm always hesitant to buy into the touchdown factor specifically because we know there's a ton of variability when it comes to touchdown production. But what I really like to see is that he was earning consistent targets down the stretch here. Average 6.1 targets per game over the last 5 games of the regular season. Only, like 60 so receiving yards per game. Not a ton, but I think what we saw toward the end of the year is that he had the trust of Baker Mayfield.
Mhm.
We saw that he was kind of the perfect complement to Mike Evans. And what else do we know? What's the final piece of the puzzle here? It's that Chris Godwin is a free agent. So I think the question mark of whether or not this is decent value is going to hinge on whether or not Chris Godwin ends up resigning. So what do you think? Do you think
No,
Chris Godwin returns? No?
no, no. I think there's going to be too many teams that are wide receiver needy this offseason. And I also don't think if you're the Bucks, I don't know if you can justify paying Mike Evans, a 30-plus-year-old receiver, and Chris Godwin, who's getting older as well, coming off a major ankle injury. I think you just rock with Jalen McMillan. Maybe you draft another receiver in rounds 3 or rounds 4 just to continue to improve the depth. I get this one. Like, McMillan is on an offense that wants to throw the crap out of the ball, that has a quarterback that's playing the best football of his career. And we saw for the first time this year, Mike Evans get banged up. And again, Mike Evans is, what is he, 31, 32 now? He's not going to be able to stay healthy forever. I think Jalen McMillan as wide receiver 34, wide receiver 35 is an outstanding value.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen him be productive at the collegiate level. We've seen him be a solid option out of the slot, which, I mean, we know that has just been pure money for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And especially if we see Liam Cohen return here in, 2025 beyond, I think we're going to be in a really good spot for Jalen McMillan. Because again, though, 60 receiving yards per game down the stretch, that's pretty solid. We never saw the boom. But when you see the trust for Baker Mayfield, especially in like red zone situations, that says something for me.
Yep. Let's talk about Brian Thomas, another one of the biggest winners in the latest batch of Dynasty ADP. He was already being drafted really high, just outside of the first round at 16th overall. Kate, he is now up to the 6th overall player. He is being drafted as wide receiver 6 right now. 7th overall player, wide receiver 6. Bijan Robinson's ADP is just slightly ahead of him, 6.33 compared to 6.83. Brian Thomas, a top 7 player in Dynasty leagues. Can you get behind that?
It feels rich. Maybe I'm just like a nervous Nelly. I've always been a little bit more of a cautious fantasy manager, right? I see a lot of players in that range that I think I know them, right? Like Nico Collins. I know the skill set. I know that Nico Collins generally been pretty healthy over his career. Obviously, we saw him get injured this year, but when I see the skill set, I have such a hard time backing off of some of these wide receivers that maybe I know.
Yeah.
And I know maybe the trajectory of their organization, their offense, etc. Those are the only things that kind of hold me back from Brian Thomas Jr. Like,
Is it surprising to you to see that he's going almost a full round ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr.?
yes. Now I think, part of the loss and interest of Marvin Harrison Jr. is kind of, I don't know. It's been kind of an interesting thing to see happen because Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously was just like pretty much consensus wide receiver 1 in this class. There were some that liked Malik Neighbors, but I think everybody thought the floor was just so safe for Marvin Harrison Jr. And guess what? It actually was. Like, we didn't see the ceiling of Marvin Harrison Jr. We saw the floor of Marvin Harrison Jr. And the floor is 885 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. Like, I think that was a pretty good, solid demonstration of how high that floor could be for a prospect like that. So I think my biggest hesitancy with that is like I think we're overreacting on the Marvin Harrison Jr. part of
Yep.
it. Maybe not so much the Brian Thomas Jr.
One other receiver that I just wanted to mention real quick was T. Higgins. He's up from 31st overall to 20th overall. And we thought we kind of anticipated this a couple shows ago because there's just not a lot of landing spots where his value is going to get worse. He has jumped players like Rashee Rice, Devontae Smith, Roma Dunze, Zay Flowers, George Pickens, all players that were above him in ADP last month. Wide receiver 15, are you buying him there?
This is hard. This is really hard. I do think there are very few spots that he's going to lose value. The only thing that keeps kind of hanging in the back of my mind is the health component. Yeah. We've seen him deal with a lot of health issues here.
He's
over
missed
the past
35% of his games, I believe, since entering the NFL.
And that's a hard thing to, I think, buy into at wide receiver 15 when I've got guys who, Roma Dunze, like it's that one. It's hard. I'm having probably the hardest time buying into T. Higgins, and literally the only reason is the health value. I know when he's on the football field, I'm going to get a wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside on any given week. My question is, what do I do the other 65% of the time?
And maybe he'll be able to just stay off the injury report. But when you're such a big guy like that, you just take a lot of hits. We'll see. I would probably be buying T. Higgins at that price. I think I would be comfortable drafting him there. But it is a little scary. Okay, let's move over to the tight end position. We did have one big riser, and that is Sam Laporta. Let's talk about his long-term dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That is $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is so easy to navigate, and there's so many different bets that keep the games exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. And whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. We've got 2 awesome games lined up this weekend. Go check out all of the odds and lines available on FanDuel right now. Again, just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. For your next listen, check out the latest episode of the Locked On NFL show. We've got 2 shows every single day, one in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about Sam Laporta, who was the consensus tight end 1 at this time last year. We thought he was going to be a superstar. He was well above everybody else. Now, he did drop during the regular season, but he's back up to tight end 3 behind Brock Bowers and behind Trey McBride. Then you look at the gap between Sam Laporta and the next tight end, and it is massive. TJ Hawkinson being drafted at 66 overall. First of all, do you buy that Sam Laporta should be going that much up in our dynasty leagues? And is there that big of a gap between Laporta and the next tight end?
I'm going to say yes and yes. Now, I think what I'm most encouraged by, and I think what we saw like leading to that big drop off in terms of his perceived value in Dynasty, it wasn't necessarily just the lack of production. He started out the year on a 4-game drought in terms of touchdown production, but we've already talked about it. Like touchdown production can be it's a volatile thing, right? Ended up breaking that streak, but still just didn't really see the usage there. Like, the usage seemed to have dropped off significantly. He was relied upon in pretty much every scenario in his rookie season and just didn't come to fruition. I mean, like 2 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets. Like that was not the Sam Laporta that we saw as a rookie. But missed one game, week 11, and he came back after averaging 3.6 targets per game to start out that year, and some closed out the year with 7.3 targets per game in the regular season over the final 7-game stretch. That is what I want to see, is that 7 targets per game, because I already know he can be a reliable weapon in the red zone, right? And again, closed out that 7-game stretch, 4 touchdowns, had another touchdown here in the divisional round, 6 receptions, 51 receiving yards, and a score. Like, once we saw that usage increase a bit, um, I felt more comfortable. And I do think that a product of that, Sam Laporta was banged up to start the year.
Mhm.
I think maybe some of that decrease in usage was just giving him a little bit of time to get healthy, get right. And then once he looked like Sam Laporta again.
And I think another reason for the big rise in his ADP is that there's just been so many other tight ends who have seen their ADPs drop. Like Travis Kelce continues to drop just every month that goes by because he's 35 years old. I know he looks awesome in the playoffs, but even if he returns in 2025, I've got to expect we're going to see kind of a similar thing, him coasting in the regular season and then getting ready for the playoffs. Dalton Kincaid had a disaster of a sophomore season. Mark Andrews had the really bad postseason game against the Bills. Tucker Kraft didn't do much down the stretch. David Njoku's got problems with his quarterback. The only other one that we like a little bit is TJ Hawkinson, but again, there could be a rookie or a second-year quarterback starting in Minnesota next year who's never taken a snap. I just think Sam Laporta, even if he's not as exciting as Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, he's probably the most safe prospect or a player there. My only concern is Ben Johnson's gone. What does this offense look like without him? I got to assume it's still going to be pretty good.
Yeah, the offensive personnel there's a lot of talent in that offense. Obviously, we love Ben Johnson. We love him as a play caller, but I still think there's plenty of talent to work with there. We'll see what their answer is at OC. But yeah, I think the gap between Sam Laporta and any other tight end is as significant as the ADP would leave you to believe. I want one of these top 3 tight ends in Dynasty. And
Yeah.
I think if you don't have one, that's when you just kind of throw a dart and see what's up. See what you kind of play the tight end by committee.
Well,
Should
I
we
think
say?
what you do is you probably grab somebody like Jake Ferguson and hope that Dak Prescott can stay healthy. Jake Ferguson down to tight end 20. Maybe you grab a Noah Gray, hoping that Travis Kelce retires. And then you grab a Cole Kmet, hoping that he could be the same Laporta in Ben Johnson's offense in Chicago. I think if you don't get one of the top 3, just wait until you get to the double-digit rounds to grab your tight end.
Jatavian Sanders, maybe a little.
Yeah, sure. Why not? At that point, why not? But yeah, Sam Laporta. I was glad to see him play well in the playoffs. A little tear came down my face when I saw him catch that touchdown one-handed. I just love watching Sam Laporta play, so it was cool to see him back in action. All right, Kate, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Friday, preparing you for the conference championship round. And we'll take a look at some of the biggest losers when it comes to the latest batch of Dynasty ADP. We'll see you